So it's 1 minute past the hour, so I think we're good to start. And anybody that joins in the meantime, there'll be a recording of the session for them. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on offshore wind lessons from the UK. My name is Daniel Taylor, and I work for the commercial team at the British Embassy based in Stockholm. Together with my colleague in Finland, Veneri Haitala, I've been following the offshore wind story in Sweden and Finland with great interest. It's clear that the momentum is building in both markets and that offshore wind will play a greater role in both the Swedish and Finnish energy markets in future. So in consultation with some of you, we've brought together speakers from the UK to talk on some key themes and areas of interest. Our aim is to try and foster collaborations and strengthen ties between the UK, Swedish and the Finnish offshore wind industries. If you are, of course, interested in engaging with the UK respective companies and industries, please don't hesitate to get in touch with Veneri and I for support. So today's session is going to focus on the requirement and role of ports in supporting offshore wind expansion. Speakers today will be Jack Patterson from BBG Associates and Oliver Davey from Arup, who will both outline some of the key requirements and scale of investment needed for different kinds of ports. Before lastly, we'll have Andy Ray from Associated British Ports, who will provide the perspective from a port operator. Before we start with the presentations, just some housekeeping. So just to inform you all, the session will be recorded and it will be shared with you, of course, after the meeting. And there will be questions at the end of the session. So we'll do the presentations first, followed by 20 minutes Q&A session. So please feel free to write questions in the chat or scribble them down on your notepad and raise your hand after the presentations to address our speakers. Veneri will moderate the Q&A session. And lastly, if I can just ask you to keep your cameras off and your mics off during the presentations, that'll be very much appreciated. So firstly, I'll hand over to Jack Patterson from BBG Associates. Jack.
Thank you, Daniel. And yeah, thank you for that introduction. As Daniel's mentioned, I'm Jack Patterson. I'm a senior consultant working at BBG Associates. At BBG, I wear many hats, but my focus is mainly on ports development, vessels, and offshore operations across the business. And today I would like to present to you a little bit of an insight in terms of the development and investment perspectives for offshore wind ports. Before I move into the actual content of today's presentation, I'd just like to give a brief summary about BBG Associates for those of you not aware of our offering. We're a strategic wind energy consultancy. We work across three main strands, looking at business strategy, economics, and assets. We were identified as a leading management consultant by the Financial Times in 2021. We were originally founded in 2006, and we've got over 330 clients globally, which is growing every day. And across the team, we've got over 200 years of industry experience with 60 landmark publications. Just to give you an idea of some of the themes that we work in terms of business strategy, we can support you in areas such as new product development, new market assessments, building a market strategy, so maybe helping individual nations understand what the opportunity lies, and also some of the technologies that are most relevant to the applications in mind. In terms of economics, we also provide opportunity analyses, local economic analyses, and visions and supply chain plans. And supply chain plans is an area we've been particularly busy of late with the forthcoming Scotland development. And in terms of assets, we also provide services for wind farm owners, and offering owners engineers roles in the form of technical due diligence, asset performance management, operational technology, and lifetime extension and repowering. As I mentioned, we've got over 60 landmark reports in the public domain. If for anybody that may well be interested across a variety of the strands that I've just already mentioned, please log on to our website where you can get links to those reports. And of course, please contact me afterwards if there's any specific interest after the presentation today. So moving on to the topic of today's discussion, looking at offshore wind ports and maybe a short perspective in terms of the current status. There's a lot in the public domain in terms of what needs to be done in order to develop suitable port infrastructure. We're seeing ports needing to shape up to manage offshore wind growth, why collaboration is critical across offshore wind ports, why floating projects need more development, how the US is looking to address the offshore wind boom, and indeed how Scotland is aiming to prepare its port infrastructure for the forthcoming ScotWind development. So in effect, the growth of the industry is increasing demand for suitable port infrastructure. And the current status is that there's a lack of suitable ports across many countries and regions that have strong ambition in order to develop offshore wind projects. And investment and development is required in order to achieve targeted build-out rates of offshore wind. As I've mentioned, I wear my hats of ports developments, ports assessments, and BBG Associates, and we've done a lot of work of late in key countries in the form of Scotland, Vietnam, US, Ireland, and indeed more recently in the Philippines and Azerbaijan. And this is highlighted, in most cases, development is necessary in order to be able to meet the long-term ambitions. In the short term, it's likely that we'll see multi-port approaches being used, where you may have some ports used for manufacture and others used for marshalling, and again, others used for O&M, until we maybe start to see the nascence of the growth of maybe offshore wind hubs or suitable locations that can accommodate for a variety of activities in one place. So what is driving the demand, and what does the forthcoming demand look like? And I'll keenly focus in Northern Europe here, as is mainly the topic of interest here today. Some of the analysis we've completed of late has highlighted that a further 80 gigawatts is forecast for installation between 2021 and 2030, building on the existing 25 gigawatts, bringing us to a total cumulative of 105 gigawatts by the end of the decade. And that's by no mean feat. This is also driven by the fact that EU has got a strong push to cut CO2 emissions and increase the uptake of renewable sources. And individual projects and the respective components and the vessels that are used to install those components are growing every day. And this is increasing the sophistication and the demands on ports in order to suit the needs of projects of tomorrow. Therefore, there are requirements to upgrade ports with future requirements in mind, which should be informed by projected and most prominent technology types that we're seeing in given jurisdictions. In terms of manufacture, which I'll get into a little bit more detail on the next slide, it's important that we understand that for the sheer scale of these components that we're building out now, it's just not feasible to transport these across land areas. Quayside manufacture is the only logical option in terms of large-scale manufacturing activities. And this really does point to the fact that there are a lack of suitable ports in order to accommodate for this, and urgent requirement is to invest in port infrastructure is required across Europe in order to align with country and continental visions. And on the bottom right hand side, we show some brief kind of perspectives that we've generated of late to understand the sheer build out of the number of turbines, fixed foundations and floating foundations that can be anticipated year by year in Northern Europe through to the end of the decade. So in terms of manufacturing ports, as I've already pointed out, the increasing size of these components mean that road transportation is not viable for several components. And portside manufacturing facilities are the preferred option for most large-scale manufacturing operations. In terms of the specifications, by no means am I trying to say that these are the definitive constraints for any port, but it gives you a basis in order to understand the sheer scale of the facilities that could be required. In terms of key lengths, we'd probably require of the order of about 320 to 450 meters. And this is with a view to accommodate for vessels that may be bringing in raw materials for a manufacturing facility, whilst also allowing maybe an installation vessel or a transportation vessel to be loading up with a view to move components to a marshalling yard. Minimum quayside bearing capacities is around about 35 tons per meter squared, although I do have the 100 ton per meter squared in brackets here. it just goes to show that this is changing all the time. As components are getting bigger, this is increasing the strain on quays, and we're starting to see, developments of ports accommodating for future implications. Storage areas are important as well, so you can lay down or you completed parts when they've been manufactured. They often require about 10 tonne per metre squared. Again, that will likely increase as components get larger in terms of weight and scale. And channel depths, of course, need to be around about 9 to 10 metres below chart datum to accommodate for the draft of these large-scale installation vessels. Channel widths also need to accommodate for turning circles of these vessels of the order of around 200 metres. And overhead clearance is obviously very critical if you're considering vertical transportation of turbine towers, for example, and that's about a 150-metre requirement. So if we do have bridges prohibiting access to a port area, that can limit the actual manufacturing potential of a suitable port. In terms of the storage areas, again, these are highly variable, and it often depends on the perspective of the manufacturer in terms of the sheer quantity of components they aim to build. In terms of turbines, they're often built across a variety of different facilities in the form of tower fabrication facilities, nacelles, and blade fabrication facilities. Towers themselves often require quite a large amount of space, similar to that of monopiles, around about 18 hectares minimum. Nacelles obviously have a smaller footprint, so you can probably accommodate anything within about 6 to 10 hectares, and turbine blades often require about 16 hectares overall. Fixed bottom foundations in the form of jacket and monopiles, a minimum around about 19 to 20 hectares, while transition pieces on their own, we only require around about 6 hectares overall, as those can be stowed vertically. With a lack of standardization and a lack of demonstration of commercial projects in the floating foundation area, it's still time will tell as to what the constraints of ports are going to be. If you are to be fabricating floating foundations on an onshore facility, it's likely you're going to require of the order of being 20 to 40 hectares. That's highly variable depending on the type of foundation that you're going to be building. Are they semi-subs? Are they going to be spar-like foundations? And also it depends on the type of material and the manufacturing method to be employed. And until we maybe start to see a bit more of a standardization of foundation concepts in the floating domain, we just really are still waiting to see as to how this will transpire over time. And indeed, there are some new ideas coming forth where we're seeing multi-port strategies aiming to move components around in order to make use of the space that is available in certain areas. A key aspect for floating foundations is, of course, being able to store completed floaters in nearby locations. And of course, it's quite important to have anchorage areas, or otherwise termed as wet storage. And a kind of general rule of thumb that we've been working to at BBG Associates is around about 15 hectares on average. In terms of the investment scale and opportunity, I draw some of the perspectives that have been outlined more recently by Wind Europe, and we've been working closely with them over the last 3 to 4 years. They've pointed out that an upgrade or an extension to an existing port facility could be of the order of 20 to 80 million, whilst a new port facility would be probably upwards of 100 million in most cases. Similarly, for floating, where there may be different constraints, maybe a greater demand on port landside space, or indeed slipways to launch completed foundations, it's anticipated that this could reach around about 200 million per facility. And decommissioning, despite this being quite some way off, and we're still probably at the early stages of considering what this is likely to be, that will probably require extensions to existing facilities or new dedicated facilities around 5 to 10 million pounds each. Hydrogen is such a hot topic, and indeed every port facility that knocks on our door at the moment is asking us about the potential for hydrogen, whether that be to store or to transmit hydrogen across energy grids in the longer term. Any sort of facility would probably require of the order of investment of 100 million in order to accommodate for that type of activity. So in terms of what's required for 2030 in Northern Europe, it's expected that with the existing 30 ports, if they were all to upgrade their facilities, that would require of the order of about 1 billion investment. If there are to be another 15 to 20 new build facilities that are currently projected at the moment, this could also require another £2 billion of investment. Well, decommissioning facilities, despite being some way off, would require of the order of 50 million. You probably start to see those emerging mid to late decade. And of course, for dedicated floating ports, this would also require about 1.5 billion worth of investment. So on the right-hand side, you see a graphic that was made around about 2017, 2018. But the reason I've included it is just to demonstrate the impact that the suitable use of port infrastructure and vessels can have in overall LCOE. And we've projected that around about 5.3% could be harnessed as a result of suitable facilities and infrastructure requirements. My last slide really just starts to focus in on the development, funding, and support initiatives that could be harnessed. And I'd like to focus in on some of those countries that have really been most active of late. The UK government has plans to invest up to around about 95 million, of the order of 111 million in UK ports. And in particular, there's a lot of focus around the Humber at the Abil facility and also in Teesside. And it's anticipated that both these facilities will be able to accommodate for up to 7 manufacturers. Construction of these facilities is actually already underway, and both of which have been named as free ports. And I'll get into some of the constraints of that slightly later. Elsewhere in the UK, we're seeing a lot of activity in Scotland, with key facilities such as Nigg, Cromarty, Firth and Dundee already looking to upgrade the facilities for future ScotWind requirements, whilst also new facilities are anticipated in Orkney, Stornoway, and indeed upgrades to the now Harland and Wolff site at Methil. Ardersier has also recently been taken over, so we're likely to see something take place there in the short to medium term. In terms of Europe, and in particular looking at the Netherlands, there's some plans afoot in order to develop the Port of Rotterdam by upgrading SIF, a key foundation manufacturer facility, in order to accommodate for improved marshalling. And also the Port of Amsterdam is considering the development of an offshore wind hub for staging and marshalling activities. In a number of different emerging markets, there is a key considerations underway in order to consider how port facilities can accommodate for their ambition and build out. In Poland, we've seen the Port of Gdynia selected as the main facility, albeit there are some concerns as to whether or not that's going to be able to accommodate for the sheer volumes that are anticipated. In the US, there are a variety of different facilities up the East Coast that have been considered, such as those in New Bedford, South Brooklyn, Virginia, Albany, and Coymans. And of course, in Taiwan, Vietnam, and indeed the Philippines that I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of interest there and a lot of market growth potential. So there are considerations already underway in order to develop port infrastructure and also see how existing port facilities can be leveraged or repurposed to support the build of offshore wind. In terms of funding, grants can be a useful mechanism in order to support the preparation of port facilities and ensure that developments are based on viable business cases and suitable returns. Whilst loans can also be used to start the ball rolling in port development, this can also attract inward investment by giving investors assurance that there's some ambition behind development plans. There are a number of different initiatives that are available to help maybe offer greater adaptability to suitable ports. And I mentioned already that free ports can provide some suitable means in order to allow ports to be able to facilitate projects elsewhere outside countries' land borders. Essentially, a free port allows you to transport goods into our port area, work on those goods, or maybe manufacture those goods, and then transport them elsewhere, maybe whether that be in Europe or elsewhere across the world. And that allows you to kind of avoid paying duty on those goods as you would normally do if you're transporting those goods directly into the country. In terms of enterprise zones, those can be a useful mechanism of being able to cluster supply chain, services, and research. And there's some model examples, such as those at the Port of Ostend in Belgium, where we've seen a lot of supply chain entities, installation contractors, all co-located within one port area that is also able to facilitate O&M and installation activities overall. Having said that, that port area is starting to be constrained in terms of space, and with the sheer scale of projects, is likely to be limited to certain activities overall. In terms of collaboration, I include this interesting graphic inset that was recently published from the Scottish Offshore Wind, SIA, which BBG Associates had a hand in feeding into. And essentially, it just paints the picture that industry, government, and ports all need to work collectively and employ joined-up thinking in order to understand how the best strategies could evolve over time in a country or indeed regions of interest. And this perspective is mainly for floating offshore wind, but I think it has relevance across all areas of offshore wind development. I look forward to having any questions later on, and I'll now pass you over to Ollie at Arup. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks very much, Jack. That's fantastic. I'll endeavour to share my screen, and hopefully that'll come through for everyone here. That's the one. Brilliant. Give me a shout if you're reading my emails, or if that's come through. Can you see that, Jack?
We can see that, Oliver.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. So yeah, welcome guys, and thanks all for joining. My name's Oliver Davey, and I'm a senior ports and maritime engineer within the Arup Infrastructure London team. I have sort of around 8 years experience in sort of port infrastructure development, and really sort of first cut my teeth in offshore wind development during a 2-year secondment I did with Scottish Power Renewables, where I worked on some development of infrastructure for both the construction and the sort of operational phases of the project, as well as during the sort of fabrication, transport, installation sort of contract, helping with some of the discrete sort of offshore work packages there. More recently, I've sort of been project managing a project for the ORE Catapult, looking into floating offshore wind sort of infrastructure development around the UK. And also had the pleasure of working with Jack, our first speaker, on a project for the World Bank, looking at key emerging market infrastructure development for offshore wind and investment opportunities. So, brief overview of what I'm going to try and cover with you today. I'll kick off touching on some of the sort of key construction and marshalling ports, providing an overview of the general sort of role before diving into some indicative requirements. I'll then sort of share a few sort of key examples to help bring in some context, and then round off exploring some key challenges as well as opportunities. I'll then sort of move on to tackling operational port roles and sort of the operation and maintenance bases, providing again a bit of an overview, some of the key requirements, along with some sort of grounding examples, and then sort of conclude with some of the sort of key challenges and opportunities. So for construction and marshalling ports, what do I mean when I say construction marshalling and assembly ports? Well, they're used as sort of intermediate points in the supply chain for projects, and there might necessarily be sort of 2 assembly facilities. So typically one for sort of turbine marshalling and one for sort of foundation units. They're sort of required sort of unrestricted access to the sea and offshore and have sort of large storage areas for the obviously components required to be transported offshore. They have a number of sort of key drivers, really. Importantly, they allow the expensive installation vessels to keep working efficiently, so potentially utilising sort of cheaper transport vessels and barges to shuttle components back and forth offshore. There's also critically, with multiple sort of global supply chains that are sort of increasingly being used on sort of Northern European projects, it offers an opportunity to consolidate for efficient installation offshore. And as sort of Jack alluded to as well, sort of component sizing increasing almost also sort of limits the production rate potentially at fabrication facilities, and again their ability to store these ever increasing size of components. So for countries sort of beginning their journey in offshore wind sector, particularly sort of crucial and relevant in opening up sort of local project development, and critically for sort of construction and marshalling ports, the location really is king, with a direct impact of the sort of location and then the distance offshore to the cost. So touching on sort of high level requirements really, marshalling and construction ports are required to sort of accept necessary sort of transport vessels delivering the components, as well as the sort of heavy lift installation vessels and or sort of jack-up vessels that will be used for the installation. So sort of typical large heavy lift vessels tend to drive the sort of draft requirements and the depth at the berth, which with obviously increasing vessel sizes coming to sort of 10 to 12 meters draft required at these berths. The berth pocket itself as well, if accepting sort of jack-up vessels, may need to be sort of prepared or have sufficient confidence in the ground conditions to enable that jacking up process. The loadout key as well, crucially with the vessels, with the components being loaded both in and off of the quay, require that sort of heavy loadout capability, and sort of for large foundations, you know, you're looking at the sort of 20 to 40 tons per meter squared, and potentially some temporary works or something to increase that more locally. In terms of on the land side, so the storage area typically will require sort of storage capacity of around sort of a quarter or 25% of the total project components as the buffer stock, and the land side sort of bearing capacity will be in the range of around 11 sort of tons per meter squared to enable the sort of movement of those components and storage on the site. There's obviously also solutions as well for potential sort of racked blades as well, and sort of the storage of sort of heavy sort of jacket components may also require sort of local strengthening within the facility to enable those sort of larger point loads to be taken. There's also a need for consideration of the required sort of office space and potential sort of controlled condition storage for other sort of ancillary items that will be sort of deployed, and as well obviously the necessary connections to enable both developers and potential users to access the port. There's also, I guess, with sometimes land space is sort of is at a premium and potentially limited in storage availability on shore. I guess also worth noting there's opportunity for sort of sheltered wet storage on barges where appropriate. So touching on a few sort of real world examples. So photograph I showed on the opening page was the sort of Bo terminal, which was a port in Vlissingen in the Netherlands. This was used for the East Anglia 1 project, which I worked on, and it held the foundation jacket and pin pile components and acted as well as that point of sort of contractual exchange of the components. And crucially with this project and many, flexibility of the lease terms for the quay and the storage area was an essential part of the project. There were sort of a few delays in the project due to manufacturing challenges with some of the components. So we had to sort of make use of the contractual terms and allowing us to modify the sort of areas leased throughout the project. The project also sort of saw sort of some organic growth in terms of ancillary activities within the port. So this included sort of increased sort of inspections of the structures themselves, as well as some works around fixing some of the sort of defect items, such as sort of some painting works activities. So again, the presence of the marshalling port helped in de-risking the project, as it provided that final opportunity for any of these sorts of activities to take place without sort of delaying any of the more expensive and challenging installation works. Onto the sort of second example I sort of got here is more of that sort of greenfield site. So this is Aberdeen South Harbour, which is around a sort of £350 million greenfield port, in which Arup worked as the detailed designers. So the port consisted of sort of around 1.2 kilometres of breakwater and sort of 1,400 meters of quay, and in the order of around 13 hectares of yard area. An important point with such a greenfield site like this. Ultimately, it took in excess of 10 years in planning, design, and construction, which I believe is still ongoing. So there's obviously criticality in getting these projects sort of developed and through. The final example here for sort of construction and marshalling port is the sort of Great Yarmouth facility on the sort of east coast of the UK. Arup worked providing sort of Scottish Power Renewables a bit of a technical and sort of cost review of the design and the proposed works to upgrade the outer harbour for the offshore wind industry. Interestingly, this obviously was co-funded by both developers for East Anglia One and Galloper, as well as the sort of port owner, Peel Ports. The capital costs of the upgrade works were in the order of around sort of £5 million, and the works sort of included sort of piled heavy lift pad, sort of key wall modifications, as well as sort of development of the actual sort of storage area with some sort of raft foundations and sort of resurfacing in the order of around sort of total facility of around 20 hectares. The total project time for this was sort of in the order of around sort of 18 months. So on to some sort of key challenges and opportunities. So yeah, as Jack mentioned, sort of continual growth of offshore components always keeps everyone on their toes as sort of size of these constantly increases, and therefore obviously driving increasing vessel growth as well, leading for need of potential increased upgrades further down the line. The offshore wind sector obviously has very particular requirements on requests, and as well as being, technical requests, there's also things like the sort of flexibility in varying the yard areas, as well as the sort of project sort of peaky and trophy demand, which obviously has its own challenges. The sort of different sort of pricing models, traditional port pricing approaches in this case obviously may be appropriate. There's also sort of upgrades and the important issues around sort of who pays and gets the wider benefits of those upgrades in the long run, and challenges in obviously the time as alluded to for doing some of these type of development works. There's also sort of often a bit of a slight sort of chicken and egg scenario as well, whereby developers don't want to and obviously can't necessarily commit to support works until they've received projects, but by which time obviously with the sort of critical path of actual development and the time for completing the works, perhaps too late for the project. So importantly, obviously negotiating these things as well in terms of agreements between ports and developers can often take time. So obviously something that needs to be considered. There's also added challenges with obviously the advent of floating offshore wind with its own unique requirements, potentially changing obviously what the facilities are needing to do. Finally, there's obviously sheer level of demand that will be required to sort of fulfill net zero ambitions as sort of countries push towards there, and it offers obviously great opportunities, but also potentially a wider sort of capacity challenges. So on to operation and maintenance ports. So the operation and maintenance ports really act as a sort of critical control base to be able to carry out the monitoring, the maintenance and repairs and routine operational activities for the wind farm. So there's a wide range of, I guess, conceivable equipment, techniques, and things that change potential options for offshore wind maintenance. I guess the main critical sort of factors really influencing the suitability of this sort of logistics solution include considerations around obviously safety and regulatory factors, also sort of response time, which is a function of sort of transport mode and speed, as well sort of flexibility, and ultimately, I guess as well, critically, the sort of direct costs of sort of maintaining and retaining that service. In sort of early projects, the facilities have often been developed as a sort of bespoke facility for a single project, specific for a specific sort of location, and a port facility capable of delivering that. So in terms of the requirements, the two sort of key models, I guess, at the moment on many projects are for either sort of crew transfer vessels, sort of referred to as CTVs, or service operational vessels, SOVs. So the key, I guess, decision-making points around which model is used is often really a mixture of considerations, but including things such as the sort of distance from the capable port facility to the offshore wind farm, the potential sort of number of wind farms as well being operated in and out of the facility, potentially also the sort of payloads and works that are likely to be taken out offshore, and critically the sort of duration and scheduling of these maintenance works. There's also limits on the potential sort of sea state, and depending on the sort of site conditions and required sort of operational windows, this could also influence the decision, along with obviously many other sort of project or potentially developer specific considerations. The crucial difference really regard to the port infrastructure itself is crucially really around sort of navigational approach and the berth and sort of draft sort of requirements. CTV vessels really requiring sort of those lower drafts of around 2.5 to 3 meters, so potentially opening up opportunities to sort of many sort of smaller ports, compared to sort of SOVs that will typically require sort of 6 to 8 meters draft, which sort of could potentially limit to a certain number of ports. So I'll quickly touch on a couple of examples. Firstly, with Lowestoft. So this is a CTV-based O&M facility, which is sort of around only sort of 1.1 hectares in total, and contains sort of marine pontoon access for the CTVs, as well as the operations building and warehousing for the East Anglia 1 project. So I worked on this project whilst I was seconded to SPR with the Arab team, and carried out some technical and commercial review that fed into the sort of port identification and selection process. Also assisted in sort of development of the specification of requirements and sort of wider technical input into the master planning and sort of the reference design. The works in total for developing the sort of marine facility, as well as the sort of onshore building works, was in total of around sort of 5 million. Moving on to, I guess, a slightly different facility, we've got the second example here is sort of Grimsby Royal Docks, which has become a bit of a sort of O&M hub and supporting sort of multiple developers and projects. So this facility is sort of capable of berthing sort of multiple SOV vessels and also CTVs with sort of pontoon access available there. The site has sort of offices and warehousing as well for those key component storage, and the sort of upgrade here was in the order of around sort of 10 million, and provides sort of a large facility capable of future sort of projects and growth. So with operation and maintenance ports, there's obviously multiple challenges, but also opportunities for projects. So commercial challenges come in the form of a variety of customers and potential varying sort of needs. There's also sort of potential challenges for developers to sort of justify investment without potential sort of pipeline of future projects as well. Conversely, there could be obviously opportunities for developers in taking that longer term view to create those hubs and enable and encourage sort of clustering and efficiencies from sort of centralized bases, as with the example, I guess, at Grimsby, and as well the Port of Tyne, where Equinor are looking to develop their base. There's also opportunities for embracing sort of future technologies as well, such as sort of drones and remotely operated vessels, to both obviously improve safety, enable some cost saving, and have sort of more efficient maintenance regime, and critically also hopefully whilst reducing the carbon footprint of operations. So finally, sort of on that note, and cognizant that renewable sector really, I guess, won't be truly green and sustainable until it addresses, I guess, the wider life cycle and carbon consumption. So as this article sort of title at the bottom, I guess, suggests, they're starting to obviously explore these options with alternative fuels for sort of operation vessels, such as the sort of hydrogenated vegetable oil and marine gas oil fuel blend that's sort of being looked at for the East Anglia One project. But there's many challenges with this, and in both obviously enabling the development of these new fuels, but also, I guess, opportunities for port infrastructure to adapt and also help and accelerate this change as well. I think that was my last slide, but yeah, some contact details there, which I'm sure we'll be able to share with you, and happy to take any questions later on. But probably pass on, conscious of time, pass on to Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. Should I just share? Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can, Andy.
Yeah. Okay. My name is Andy Ray. I'm Group Head of Commercial, specifically for offshore wind within ABP. ABP are they are the largest port operator in the UK, with 21 ports across England, Scotland, and Wales. I've just got a brief slide here just to kind of cover off some of the interactions that ABP has with the offshore wind industry. We've been involved in the offshore wind industry actually for over 10 years now, and I'll just briefly go over some of the highlights across our portfolio of that interaction. Probably the jewel in the crown, and I've seen a few images in previous slide decks, is the Greenport Hull facility. That is essentially a dedicated offshore wind manufacturing and loadout facility based on the Humber in the northeast of England, and that facility provides the home for Siemens UK blade manufacturing facility and loadout facility for the turbines. It's exciting to see that Siemens have actually committed further to that location, and have just recently taken FID on a further factory expansion of that facility, which hopefully should see it being future-proof for the next at least decade. Beyond that facility, ABP also have 3 other touch points with offshore wind related to operations and maintenance facilities. And again, I've seen a few images in previous slides covering those. But across those 3 other facilities, we are supporting approximately 7 gigawatts of the UK's offshore wind installed capacity. So that's more than 50% of all the installed offshore wind capacity in the UK is supported from one of ABP's facilities. By far the largest of those is Grimsby, which is not only the UK's largest O&M port, but also technically currently the world's largest in terms of the most number of wind farms and the most number of operational turbines offshore. That facility is also plays host to the UK's ORE catapult, the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, which is a kind of quasi industry stroke government research body, which does a lot of great work in terms of offshore wind. But they have their centre of excellence for their operations and maintenance group based out of Grimsby, Grimsby being the largest kind of potential users of that service. Going to the northwest of the UK, of England, we've got the Port of Barrow, which provides home to a cluster of Irish Sea offshore wind farms from effectively round 1 and round 2, just in the Irish Sea there. And then finally, swinging around to the east of England, we've got the Port of Lowestoft, which is the base for SSE's Greater Gabbard and Scottish Power Renewables East Anglia One facility, which Oliver has just been speaking about. The point of my slide deck today is to really give you a bit of an insight into a port operator's perspective on some of the investments we've made in offshore wind, some of the lessons learned, some of the things which have gone well, some of the things which we're going to learn from and use going forward. And I'll start off by focusing in on the Green Port Hull facility. So we've got a visualization here in the top right hand corner. That shows the Siemens expanded blade factory. The facility itself is based on the Humber, which is the UK's kind of most coherent offshore wind cluster. So there's lots of activity in and around the Humber in support of offshore wind. As mentioned earlier, we've also seen that the UK government has made an investment in the south bank of the Humber, with our colleagues at Able and the AMET facility. But in terms of Green Port Hull, it represents around a £310 million investment, of which ABP put in 150 million. It's approximately 54 hectare site with what you can see there on the river, 3 heavy lift berths capable of supporting jack-up operations. The facility exports blades not only to UK projects, but to other pre-assembly ports in the UK and also to other markets. So it's the Siemens facility has been previously or is about to be used for export into other markets, possibly into the US and back into Europe. The investment in the infrastructure we made included provision of a ro-ro berth. That was to allow the import and export of not only components but raw materials. The benefit of that is it allows you to continue your import and export operations while you've got jackups doing the kind of main loadout activity. The investment itself wasn't just in the physical infrastructure, but also in a program of wider supply chain engagement to try and encourage the supply chain to cluster in and around the Humber to support Siemens, but also the wider offshore wind industry. And that's been hugely successful. There was a recent study which showed the level of engagement, and I think it was over 1,000 SME organizations engaged with the program, and there's been a whole host of success stories related to local companies providing services into Green Port Hull. And as I mentioned earlier on, Siemens have recently announced that they're going to make a further investment in this facility by expanding the blade factory there. So what are the lessons learned? Well, Green Port Hull, it came into operation in 2016, but it was actually the 3 years prior to that, which is where the real kind of the meat of the investment took place. There were around 3 years of discussions in advance of our final investment decision with our customer and government around how we can create a business model to justify this kind of investment. And that really kind of focused in on 4 key elements. Firstly, energy policy. So we, ABP, needed to know that Siemens could make a commitment to us, but Siemens needed to understand what their commitment was going to be from the various developers with offshore wind projects in the UK. And then that, in turn, those developers needed the government to provide them with confidence that they could bring their projects to the market. And that was a bit of a kind of market breakdown in the UK at that moment in time. So the government, industry, and the developers came forward with what we called the FIDA, the FID enabling projects, which was a period in and around 2013, which enabled those projects to secure a route to market, which allowed Siemens to secure some orders on the back of those projects, which then meant they could make a commitment to ourselves. That was very much a moment in time. The market has completely changed now, and in the UK we switched to a CFD model, which I'll come on to later, is causing some timing issues around these large investments. One of the other key challenges was the speed of pace of the technology innovation. When we first started talking to Siemens, we were talking about sub 3 megawatt sized turbines. By the time we came to actually finish the build of the Green Port Hull, we were building 6 megawatt direct drive machines. So that's over a 50% increase in the technology. And 6 megawatt now just seem so small because we're now talking about 15 megawatt turbines coming to the market. So that speed of innovation is key. and understanding the requirements of port infrastructure in relation to that innovation is key. And that comes to the third point around scalability. We originally were in discussions around, for example, say a 50-hectare site, but because the market, the offshore wind market, was expanding so rapidly, and some of the projections were that we would need significantly more capacity. As the port operator, we had to demonstrate to Siemens that we could provide potential expansion routes for the facility. So we could go from 50 hectares, which is as it is currently sized. We had to demonstrate that we had potential pockets of land or development options to take that to 100 hectares or potentially to 150 hectares. That hasn't quite come through to fruition as yet, but we still have that capacity to develop further should Siemens require it. And then the final element around why Siemens chose ABP as the partner was around deliverability. Siemens needed to know that the port partner was able to provide, or we could provide confidence to Siemens that we could deliver a project of this size. And we had that track record. So we had an existing track record of large investments. Our shareholding, we are owned by a group of 5 large shareholders who are sovereign wealth funds and pension funds. So we had a lot of financial backing to stand behind our £150 million commitment. And also we'd made an early investment in terms of the consenting process. So before we got into these conversations, we had already gone through a consenting process for albeit a slightly different project, but we'd done a lot of the early kind of legislative engagement around the potential development of a project on the Humber. So these were key talking points in advance of the final investment decision. Why Siemens chose the Humber generally? It comes back to a few things that's been said already. Proximity to market is key. Siemens being in close proximity to the huge amount of offshore wind installed capacity off the east coast of the UK was critical to them and is proving to be critical still. In addition to that, vessel access, not only the vessels back in 2013, which probably needed 5, 6, 7 meters of draft, but we knew that the turbine components were going to get bigger, and we had to demonstrate that those larger vessels to carry those components could continue to access the port infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier on as well, the ability to use alternative existing berths within the port was a key risk mitigation factor. So being able to import and export and continue operations while you've got jackup vessels doing the project loadout was a key kind of risk mitigation for the project, and a key mitigation operationally, which is still employed by Siemens. One of the positives we took out of the whole process was the positive safety culture. It was one of the first times that such a large project had been undertaken by ABP in the offshore wind industry. And actually, through working with Siemens, we instigated a safety culture as part of that project, which we've then gone on to translate right across the ABP business because it was so successful in minimizing health and safety issues and promoting a safety culture. So that was a significant positive. The wider supply chain program was critical, we believe, in gaining both national government and local government support for the project. Without the support of local government in terms of approving planning and helping us with some of the kind of consenting hurdles that had to be overcome, this project wouldn't have been the success it has been. And the success of the project is measured in the fact that the vast majority of employees at the Siemens facility are from within the local city and the local region. So the whole premise of the project was that it would be not only local content for the UK, but also a significant economic addition to the Humber region by providing both jobs and economic activity for supply chain organisations. And then finally, in terms of lessons learned for Green Port Hull, we lent heavily on our sister organisation, a company called ABP MER, who provide marine consultancy, not only to the offshore wind industry, but specifically in terms of offshore wind. They provided ABP a huge amount of support in terms of the consenting route, what the licensing requirements. They did a lot of the analysis of the draft of the vessel to kind of calculate access windows into the port. They did a lot of statistical analysis of met ocean data and weather downtime to help us make the case to our end customer, Siemens, that this facility would be their location of choice. And then finally, they did a lot of the technical dredging studies that were required to actually build the quay and to build the jacking pocket for the vessels to come and pick up the components. So that's ABP from a kind of manufacturing and pre-assembly perspective. If I now move on to operations and maintenance, as I mentioned before, Grimsby is currently the largest the largest O&M facility in the world. We're supporting around 5 gigawatts of offshore wind from there, but with huge potential to further service some of the projects which are in the pipeline going forward. We've got Ørsted's East Coast Hub based out of the Royal Dock, as well as RWE have recently announced that they are going to set up the RWE East Coast Hub for the servicing of Tritonol and the Sophia wind farm. In addition, across in the Fish Dock, we've got more CTV-based operations with Execo and the existing Humber Gateway project. But we feel Grimsby is a bit of a success story in the fact that not only do you have the kind of O&M operators themselves, but you've got a cluster of supply chain organizations starting to form around the port. And that's a huge economic benefit to the local area, and something that ABP are looking to recreate across some of our other ports. So moving down to Lowestoft, and taking learning from the Grimsby operation in the transition from CTV to SOV type O&M operations, we are looking to bring the Lowestoft Eastern Energy Facility project to the market. This is a redevelopment of the outer harbour to allow SOV operations to be undertaken out of Lowestoft. And the reason we're looking to invest in Lowestoft is there are a huge amount of gigawatts to be installed in the southern North Sea in terms of offshore wind, and we feel there is a real need for a kind of an O&M dedicated hub to provide up to 10 gigawatts of offshore wind farm with a location where they can come and bring their SOVs. In addition to that, we're also looking to use this upgraded port infrastructure for construction support activities. Not necessarily the larger vessels that we've previously spoken about, but some of the kind of support balance of plant type operations during the construction phase. We would certainly be keen to encourage those guys to come to Lowestoft. And then finally, across in Barrow, yeah, we're currently supporting a host of offshore wind farms over there. Again, we do have potential here to switch from CTV type operations to SOVs because we do have the water depth, albeit behind a lock as we have in Grimsby. But there's up to 4 gigawatts being installed in the Irish Sea, and we believe Barrow has the development space and the laydown area to be able to support those projects going forward. In addition to the kind of physical port infrastructure, we're also being asked a lot of questions at the moment around the future, particularly in terms of operations and maintenance, how the port infrastructure can help make O&M activities more efficient. And that really centers on 2 key elements. The first one here is around decarbonising marine operations. So I've got a little diagram here which shows you can potentially use green electrons, whether they are created on site or off site in the port environment, to one, provide shore power to the O&M vessels, the CTVs and the SOVs, or if those vessels require, for example, their battery hybrid technology, they require recharging services from the port infrastructure. we need to be looking at that now, because that has the potential. If all of these vessels switch to battery technology, all of a sudden we would need to upgrade the HV supplies into the port environment. We would have to rethink how the local electrical grid is perhaps designed in and around the port in the future. As well as that, we're also in discussions with various organisations around the potential for hydrogen production, either on site or off the port, which can then be brought into the port environment to feed hydrogen-based or hydrogen-fueled vessels in the future. And then the final kind of string to that kind of low carbon element is around alternative liquid fuels, such as green ammonia, liquid organic hydrogen carriers. These are more akin to conventional bunker arrangements, whereby you have a bunker barge or a series of storage tanks within the port, but they do have very specific requirements which are different to the existing infrastructure. So if we want to bring that type of infrastructure to the market, we need to be planning now in order to bring that online in, say, 5 to 10 years, as the offshore wind developers start to transition some of their vessels towards lower carbon technology. The second element is around data and connectivity. We're in discussions with a variety of our current tenants around what the future holds for them in terms of managing their farm. With 5G connectivity and basically creating a significantly improved data network within the port, it then starts to open up options for the O&M providers around optimizing their port operations. They can run digital port twin models, and they can use devices located on board the vessels or located in and around the port infrastructure, which means they can start to control their O&M activities on the shore side more in tune with the vessel operations. For example, they could have supplies already on the quayside as the vessel, say for example, comes within the 3-mile limit of the port. We could have things being delivered to the port side automatically, or certainly automatically ordered via the system, so that you can get a quick turnaround with the vessel once it's in port. This leads into integrated planning of services and supplies. You might not need to have stevedores on the quayside. You could maybe optimize and lower the cost of your O&M activity by having a third party providing a service which just takes data automatically from the vessel in terms of its inventory and what it needs to replenish. Car parking and automated parking management systems, that's typically an issue amongst within many ports. The lack of parking. An example would be one of these SOVs. The technicians for those SOVs, they need to park up their vehicles for up to 2 weeks. Now, one of the big questions is, do you do that within the port, so they're close to the vessel, or do you do it off-site? And how do you manage all of that parking? That is becoming more and more of an issue as we see more and more CTVs sharing berths. And I can see in the future places like Grimsby needing in excess of 1,000 parking spaces to support all of the activity which is going on. The next step could be around automated vessels, automated pilotage of vessels as they approach into the port. That gets some of our pilots and some of our harbour masters a bit kind of scared currently, but you can certainly see that as the direction of travel in terms of the technology. And then finally, what does drone port look like, and what do drone operations look like? Why do we send these expensive vessels offshore when potentially we could use automated drone? Certainly for relatively nearshore turbines, we could use drones to send off materials and spare parts and things like that. So this is certainly an area of particular interest to ABP over the next 5 to 10 years. And finally, I just wanted to kind of briefly touch on floating offshore wind. The lessons we've learned from Greenport Hull were very specifically around the fixed bottom and the market for offshore wind at that moment in time in the UK. we do have plans to create a floating offshore wind hub in the south of Wales, in a port called Port Talbot. We believe it has the technical features and the relevant brownfield land to be able to support certainly the Celtic Sea, and beyond that with the fabrication of foundations and the pre-assembly of turbine components. But we are using the learning from Greenport Hull in terms of the business model to support that. We've learned that in the current CFD world, the decision timing for commitment from the developers or the supply chain doesn't align with the timescale required to develop a port or a development of this size and nature. So we are currently in discussions with government, both local and national, about how we can kind of pump prime a development like this, so we can kind of take it out of the CFD cycle of having commitment from customers 2 years in advance of requiring the facility. That's not possible when you look at the kind of hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment. You can't make those investments on the time horizon of the CFD auctions. It has to be more strategic, and that's why we would like to see more developers coming together who are looking at a particular zone within the UK and collaborating more on their port requirements to help the port operator themselves make the commitment to the investment in advance of the demand as the project's needed. So that's all I wanted to say. Very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andy, and many thanks to Jack and Oliver as well. This was a great overview of the development in the UK and insight into the cooperation between ports and offshore wind sectors. So now we have some time for questions. As mentioned in the beginning, if you have any questions, please feel to type this in the chat box or raise your virtual hand. But first of all, I received some practical questions on whether we'll share the recording, and the answer is yes. We will upload this onto our website later on. And since this is our third offshore wind webinar, we will also update the website with previous presentations. But yeah, we have received some topic-related questions as well before, so I think Oliver and Andy already touched on this topic. But there's a question on how the development costs are typically divided between developers and ports in the UK. So do you, Oliver, Andy, want to continue to provide some more perspective into this?
From my perspective, there've been a whole host of different models employed. I know, for example, in some ports, the developers have maybe a pipeline of projects stretching out over several years, which means that they can then provide commitment to a particular port so that the port can make investment. That's increasingly no longer the case in terms of the UK market. You're seeing a lot more competition. There are a lot more entrants. So any one individual developer doesn't necessarily have that pipeline to give you commitment. What we are seeing is that the tier one suppliers, so the turbine manufacturers, the foundation manufacturers, they can take multiple orders from developers, and they are in a position to provide that commitment. But again, because of the CFD cycles, that commitment tends to come quite late, and we're seeing that playing out in the UK at the moment, whereby we've seen some investment decisions declared, but those investment decisions don't become real until those orders are placed, which doesn't happen until the CFD auction is completed.
Yeah, not much more to add from my side. I guess there's potential different options in terms of how it's structured, in terms of whether they help in some upfront cost to secure a facility, because obviously that, as alluded to, is a competitive sort of position in terms of being able to obviously secure a finite amount of infrastructure, or whether obviously the actual rates and the market, I guess, fees and costs stabilized to account for that as well, and the demand required. But yeah.
Thank you.
Can I come back again? So one of the key challenges for the way the UK port industry is kind of set up is that we need to back off our investment against a commitment from a customer over 5, 10, 15 years. And as I've just described, that's quite difficult to do. So I think what we saw last year was the UK government stepping in to bridge that market failure and to effectively pump prime some key projects in the UK. I think that has to be the model going forward, particularly when we look to things like floating offshore wind port investment. The market won't develop sufficiently quickly in order to justify the kinds of investments we're looking for. Therefore, we need the government or some other body or some other mechanism to kind of effectively pump prime. Otherwise, we will miss the boat, and other port facilities elsewhere in Europe or beyond will fill the void. And then the problem of investment becomes even more acute because you don't have as many projects to kind of justify it over.
Good. And I think related to this, there was also a question, I mean, how close is the cooperation between developers and ports? So Andy, perhaps you can, if you have anything to add.
I think developers are very focused on what they need to deliver their specific project. I don't necessarily think that port and developer direct kind of collaboration is that critical. It needs to be across a region. So you need, for example, all of the developers in the ScotWind project. Once we get over the competitive phase of that auction process, they need to then come together and they need to start thinking about, right, well, how do we trigger the kind of investment we all need to deliver our projects? It's very hard to do that before you've won your project kind of license, but it needs to happen at kind of right across the developers. It's not just a one-to-one between developer and port.
Okay, good. I don't see many questions, but I know we have some developers and port representatives joining this event. So we are quite curious if you have any views on potential ports in Finland or Sweden for construction facilities or marshalling ports. So if anyone has any views, we are very interested in hearing. But of course, if there are no other questions, I think I would just like to thank our presenters. I think we received a great snapshot of how ports can support offshore wind sector in the UK. And my colleague in Stockholm, Daniel, and myself, we are always keen to work with you and respond to your questions. So please